The holidays are over. The first week of October has come, and with it, massive updates to the Israeli travel and Green Pass systems. Or at least there will be changes as soon as the Health Ministry website gets back up and running. The Israeli Health Ministry issuing a 3-day extension to current/old Green Pass holders Sunday morning. And this just as the new and allegedly improved Green Pass system is set to take effect. The reason? Catastrophic technical difficulties with the ministry's website and the Ramzor mobile app. Or put simply, the ministry website crashed from all of the traffic. Still, in just 72 hours, the new regulations will be in force, effectively voiding some 2 million green passes. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett saying that we're in a critical stage where we must be especially strict about the regulations while moving towards a model of extensive testing and quarantining for verified cases only. Likewise, the COVID cabinet removing all remaining nations from its red countries travel list, meaning vaccinated Israelis will be able to fly to just about anywhere without having to isolate upon return. And this as cases have been dropping practically worldwide. The infection rate in Israel now down to 2.76%. With fewer than 600 serious patients for the first time since mid-August. There were 738 serious patients just 1 week ago. And of those in hospital, a little over 5% had received booster shots, nearly 20% had only 2 doses of the vaccine, and nearly all the rest were entirely unvaxxed, which brings us to the new Green Pass rules. Under the new regulations, all Green Passes issued before October 3 will be revoked, and those eligible to receive one under the new guidelines must reapply via their HMOs, the Health Ministry, or either the Ramzor website or Ramzor app. Eligibility, meanwhile, extending to all those who are 1 to 2 weeks past their 3rd dose of the vaccine, even if vaxxed abroad. People who are within 6 months of their 2nd dose, and people who have serological proof of recovery from COVID, plus 1 dose of the vaccine either from before or after their infection. Green Passes will last for up to 6 months and will be necessary to enter cultural and sporting events, conferences, exhibits, hotels, gyms, pools, clubs and studios, houses of worship with over 50 people, concerts, festivals, bars, restaurants, cafes, indoors and outdoors, schools, and more. Entrance to these sites without a pass will be limited to those with a negative COVID test and not one performed at home. Now, speaking of the new coronavirus regulations, one major issue with the Green Pass's updates is yet to be resolved. Among the nearly 2 million Israelis soon set to lose their passes are roughly half of the nation's educators. And then adding insult to injury, concerns over poor staffing, pay, and working conditions long going unanswered, leading to a massive strike across the country starting today. Employees at state-supervised daycares beginning an open-ended strike that will directly affect some 50,000 children and their families. Joining me now to discuss is value creation expert from the Academic College in Tel Aviv, Jaffa, Dr. Alex Cohen. Dr. Cohen, thanks so much for being with us. Now, first off, wouldn't you agree with the teachers' grievances, essentially? I mean, the teachers' union is saying that Prime Minister Bennett and Finance Minister Lieberman are willing to negotiate with Hamas, but are refusing to hold negotiations with teachers who earn 5,000 shekels a month and are collapsing from the load. Meanwhile, the average teacher's pay is roughly 6,000 shekels a month, which is just over minimum wage, at 5,300 a month, which hasn't changed in about 4 years. And this, as I'm sure you know, is far, far below the cost of living, really. So, again, how do you respond to the teachers' grievances?
First of all, the major topic of conversations between me and my daughter is me trying to convince her to stop being a teacher. So that's because of this pay issue. But I think that the problem, first of all, I think they should negotiate. There's no question about that. But I think the major problem is that there's lack of leadership. It's like in that fable where every animal pulls in its direction. So the Minister of Education is very problematic in the sense that she does not show leadership or direction, and the Minister of Health has another direction, and the Prime Minister has yet another direction. And actually, even the teachers have several organizations, so there's not a single organization representing them. So I think this, to a large extent, the fact that there's no negotiations, that's a symptom. It's not that the government is clear about its objectives and refuses to negotiate, is that the government is completely, not completely, but quite clueless. And for that reason, they would not negotiate. So absolutely, I think this is outrageous. I mean, it's obvious that the teachers would not go to teach without an agreement. So why?
Of course.
Why wait for this mess to happen?
All right, now how big of an impact is this expected to have on the economy as a whole? Because again, we're talking about 50,000 plus children and their parents who are likely going to be heavily impacted insofar as their workday.
Well, I think that quite a few organizations in Israel are working in a hybrid mode. So the meaning of the hybrid mode is that people can work a few days from home and a few days they go to the office. And this means that the damage would not be that colossal in the sense that parents could alternate. And so one parent would be with the kids. And also we see grandparents deeply involved in that. So I think that the economic impact is not going to be devastating.
All right, and what final question, what about the timing of this? Because we have Orna Barbivai, the economy minister, criticizing the timing. She says she essentially agrees with the grievances, but says that, right now during a COVID crisis is not the time to bring it up. I would argue, I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I would argue that when you have such leverage, it's the perfect time to bring it up, no?
Absolutely. I mean, when do you see firemen requiring salary raises right after a big fire? So I mean, that's the idea. And in particular now, as I said before, there's such a shortage of leadership. You do not, because normally if you had a strong, knowledgeable minister of education, everybody would know how things are conducted. And this is not the case. Usually you do not know until the day how things will happen. And also that person would be the champion of improving the conditions of the teachers, in the sense that on one hand, you want the teachers to work with masks and take all these duties upon themselves that are not normally part of their job, fighting with parents who don't want to wear masks or things like that. So on one hand, you put extra load on the teachers, and on the other hand, you're not a champion to improve their conditions. And I think this is a major mistake.
All right, Dr. Alex Coman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Moving on, COVID, not the only virus plaguing Israel right now, with nearly 100 Israeli Arabs, men, women, and children murdered since the start of this year. In fact, the hashtag Arab Lives Matter beginning to trend on Israeli social media as hardly a day goes by in the Arab sector without a criminal shooting, homicide, or violent fight to report, including just this weekend when a fight broke out between police and supposed local security forces. Yet while this issue continues to grow every year, billions of shekels and hundreds of man-hours are spent on addressing this issue. So why is this terrible phenomenon not only persisting, but spreading? With me to help explain, Israeli journalist, author, and attorney, Ben-Dor Yamini. Ben-Dor, thanks so much for being with us. Now, there are several theories as to why this issue is persisting in the Arab sector, particularly as opposed to the other demographics in Israel. Why do you think it's so bad?
It's many years now that Israel is losing control because of many reasons. And one of the main reasons is that, with all the discourse of human rights, many times police people feel that they are totally paralyzed. They cannot do anything, actually. So, for example, what's going on in the Negev? When we know exactly what is going on, when they are going to the army bases and actually taking a lot of equipment, and nobody is doing anything because nobody wants actually to confront them. Now, something must be clarified. And I'm talking about here and there you hear voices, excuses about unemployment, about neglection, and about that kind of stuff. No, it's not the case. It's not the case because in the last decade, the government invested in the Arab sector more than in any decade before. Gaps are not getting wider. Gaps are getting smaller. And we should know it. So there is not any connection between what the government did to the Arab sector and the outcomes that we see in the last few months.
All right, well, so again, though, we're seeing from some people, they're saying that Israeli forces largely ignore the issue when Jews aren't involved, that after certain incidences in the early 2000s, they largely avoid going into certain Arab areas. They say that Jewish mobs were targeted and largely rooted out in the late 90s, and there's a discourse about culture. There are many people who say that there's a culture that leans in towards violence and bravado, and then there are others who say that this is a very small minority. And then, of course, there's gang warfare, which I just alluded to. Why do you think, if we go with gang warfare, why do you think that the Jewish gangs, such as they are, were rooted out more or less successfully, whereas the Arab gangs are not?
Okay, it's very interesting because, first of all, because the police is trying to do the utmost in order not to provoke the Arab population in general. So many times it's coming on the expense of the Arab population. I mean, because many times when you ignore the gangs and what is going on, who is paying the price? It's mainly the Arabs themselves. Just the same about what is going on with the mass killings that are taking place. We are speaking about 100 people only this from the beginning of this year. And yes, it is a tragedy. Now, speaking about culture, we have to bear in mind that I don't know exactly, I think something like between 20 to 30%, it's family issues, not only gangs. Yes. I mean, many times it's women issues. I mean, families kill their own family members. I mean, it's a tragedy. Yeah. It has to do about...
that's the argument about culture. That's the culture argument. But again, there are those who reject that argument as a small and vocal minority.
No, it's not a small minority because even if we are not speaking about killing of women, we are speaking about killings as a revenge inside the family. I mean, they have conflicts and you have no idea what, and people don't understand what is going on, but they kill each other. I mean, as a kind of honor. Not, I mean, you have, we say in Hebrew, kavod, but we say it in English, we say honor.
Honor killing.
But it's honor, it's honor killings. It's not dignity.
Ben Dor-Yamini, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
In other news, UNRA, or the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, facing an existential budget crisis. The organization calling for an immediate infusion of $120 million to keep essential healthcare, education, and other such services running. Additionally, UNRWA Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini announcing the request for another $800 million from a donor conference scheduled for November. UNRWA's financial woes not from nothing, though. The EU, US, and other world leaders canceling or otherwise conditioning their aid to UNRWA on UNRWA's reforming of its educational curriculum. According to many reports, Palestinian school books continue to consistently show a systematic insertion of violence, martyrdom, and jihad across all grades and subjects. And UNRWA staff are not much better. UN Watch's Hillel Neuer repeating calls to remove UNRWA educators who routinely preach violence and hatred before being cut off by the president of the UN Human Rights Council with a made-up rule.
Nahed Sharawi, an UNRWA math teacher in Gaza, posted a video of Adolf Hitler, along with quotes to enrich and enlighten your thoughts and minds. Hosni Masri, an UNRWA teacher in the West Bank, posted anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about how Jews control the world, created the coronavirus, and seek to destroy Islam. Esra Abdul Rahim,
I asked the Secretary to pause this video. I have noticed that in the course of this video, derogatory, insulting, and inflammatory remarks have been made, which in particular refer directly to specific individuals. This amounts to personal attacks against those individuals, and it is not acceptable in this forum.
Now, on a related note, aside from education, Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza are also now facing a dire issue of water scarcity. In fact, when UN Watch's Hillel Neuer was interrupted at the UN Human Rights Council, the floor was then handed over to the Palestinian Return Center, whose rep discussed how nearly 660,000 Palestinians in the West Bank and roughly 90% of those in Gaza have limited access to clean water. And while the PRC has been outed as Hamas's organizational arm in Europe, there is a Palestinian water problem, as detailed in a recently published UN report. So here to discuss the issue is founder and director of Palestinian Media Watch, Itamar Marcus. Itamar, thanks so much for being with us. Now, the report says that some 14,000 Palestinians in Area C, that's Israeli-controlled, of the West Bank, have no connection to water. That's 660,000 in the West Bank overall have limited access well below the recommended daily intake, and that just 10% of the 2 million Gazans who are living there have access to clean, safe water. These numbers are expected to get worse. What are the reasons for this?
Well, let's go place by place. First of all, when we talk about Area C, and they're complaining that Palestinians aren't connected to the water grid, well, this is exactly the way it should be. In Area C, the overwhelming majority, in fact, almost all the Palestinians who are living in Area C are living there illegally. Area C is under Israel's jurisdiction. Any building has to be done with Israeli permission. The European Union and some European countries have been funding Palestinians building in Area C for the sole purpose of stealing this land from Israel before any negotiations take place about it. So, of course, if somebody comes and illegally builds a house on your land and then wants to ask you to be connected to the water grid, that's outrageous. That's the first thing. Second of all, for the Palestinians who are living in other areas of the West Bank, let's say areas A and B, which have Palestinian jurisdiction, one of the things that's mentioned in the report is that 1/3 of the water in coming to the Palestinians in these areas is actually lost to water leakage. Now, here's a great opportunity for the United Nations and the EU. Instead of putting so much money into Area C, which is illegal, why don't they put the money into fixing the infrastructure in areas A and B? There is so much wasted money in the Palestinian Authority. Palestinian Authority, of course, spends $350 million a year on salaries to terrorists. Why don't they put some of that money into infrastructure and save the water instead of just having 1/3 of the water that they're receiving from Israel being wasted?
And with respect to Gaza?
With respect to Gaza, here you have another interesting situation. Israel handed over Gaza in 2005 to the to essentially the Palestinian Authority.
Well, I mean, I can say that according to this report, they're saying that Gaza is basically in a situation where their infrastructure, as you mentioned about the West Bank, is severely damaged, dilapidated from years of war and lack of updating and lack of keeping with that infrastructure. Would you agree with the report about the fact that Israel withholds a lot of the materials that would be used to repair that infrastructure?
Israel has been withholding a lot of the materials for the very simple reason, look where Hamas has put them. Hamas claimed it had over 100 kilometers worth of tunnels. Well, those metals and steel and cement that would be needed for the water systems would be going into those tunnels. I'll go beyond that. There was a statement made after the last war by a Hamas spokesman on television, and Palestinian Media Watch publicized this. It's on our website, where he said the following. He said, Hamas has been fantastic. We've taken water pipes and turned them into silos for shooting rockets. So how can Israel be blamed if the Palestinian Authority does have water pipes and Hamas is using them for terror? So you can't minimize this. You can't minimize how Israel is withholding. Israel withholds what the Palestinians are using to kill Israelis. It also should be noted that Israel recently did allow a large amount of these materials to go in, and hopefully there will be proper supervision so we won't end up having more loss of Israeli life because of Palestinians misusing Israel's goodness and using those, turning them into weapons to kill Israelis.
And now we also know that and the UN did acknowledge this, that Israel is already working to create a new pipeline to Gaza to at least double their intake of water. But how else can maybe this solution be solved? What other solution might there be to providing water where it's most needed without, at least in the case of Gaza, providing materials to Hamas?
Well, it's known Israel has offered to work with the Palestinians on desalinization. They don't want desalinization. There have been many offers that Israel has made that the Palestinians have refused. One of the things that we have to notice is that the Palestinian Authority since its inception, has creating lots of miserable conditions for its people, and in order to be able to blame Israel. For example, the whole refugee, do you realize that 60% of the residents of Gaza are still technically refugees living in refugee camps? The Palestinian Authority won't let them go out of refugee camps and have a regular life. Why? Because the Palestinian Authority wants them to continue suffering, because suffering creates hatred for Israel. So they make them suffer by not letting them get on with their lives and getting out of the refugee camps in Gaza. And of course, they hate Israel. And they blame it on Israel. Same thing here with the water. So much of this water situation, again, is misused funding by the Palestinian Authority. If the EU and the UN wants to help solve their water problem, start putting money into those infrastructures. Make the PA put its own money. Tell the PA, you know what, take that $350 million a year and put it, that you're giving to terrorists right now, and put it into water systems and water infrastructure, and you probably solved your entire problem.
Itamar Marcus, thank you so much for your insights.
You're very welcome.
Now, for our final topic tonight, Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid finishing his landmark trip to Bahrain 1 year after normalizing ties, and the visit coinciding with the opening of the first Israeli embassy in the Gulf Arab state. But not everyone's swayed just yet. In fact, early polls found that less than 20% of Bahrainis actually publicly supported normalization. So during Lapid's trip, anti-Israel protests breaking out in small pockets across the island nation. Marchers chanting death to Israel and no to an Israeli embassy in Islamic Bahrain. Police, for their part, dispersing the crowds, firing tear gas into one such rally. And no arrests or injuries have been reported. All that said, though, at least the Bahraini parliament still confident with the direction that things are taking.
Our opportunities are shared. Our threats are also shared, and they're not far away from here. So we call for coexistence for all nations, all peoples of the Middle East, to live side by side, despite differences in ideologies and religion and sect and ethnicity, live side by side to achieve stability, security, and prosperity for all nations of the Middle East.
Let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight you can expect clear to partly cloudy skies and comfortable lows, averaging at about 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow you can expect partly cloudy skies and even some rain up in the north by Katzrin. Daily highs, meantime, dropping slightly to about 82 Fahrenheit or 28 degrees Celsius. Now, before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral here in Israel. I love these kind of artists. It's surprisingly, insanely difficult to get a likeness and a cartoon all at the same time. Oh! Oh, and I didn't see that coming. Oh, that's sweet. All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.22 shekels to the American dollar and 2.54 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.